What's the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack? Is it important to recognize the difference, and if so, why? In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the key differences between the two and explaining what that actually means for us in terms of understanding and mitigating our anxiety response. You'll want to stick around to the end of the video on this one because I'm also going to talk about the potential problem with both of these distinctions and how we avoid exacerbating our issue so we can get back in control. I'm Tim Box, and this is Anxiety Attack or Panic Attack. So welcome back to my channel, or if this is your first time, I'm Tim Box, I'm a mind coach, and for the last 12 years or so, I've been working with people to help them overcome all sorts of emotional and psychological issues, and in particular, helping people to get control of anxiety and eradicate panic. If you'd like to support my efforts to help, then please leave a like on this video, and why not subscribe for more mind coaching and anxiety advice videos every week. Okay, so the terms anxiety attack and panic attack will often get used by people interchangeably to mean pretty much the same thing, but there are actually quite a few different ways that we might distinguish between the two responses. Now, we'll talk about the merits and potential hazards of drawing this distinction later, but here are the main ways that different people will distinguish between a panic attack and an anxiety attack. Many people who suffer with high anxiety levels will refer to an anxiety attack as a less intense or severe version of a panic attack. Whilst this isn't strictly the case, it can very easily be perceived that way. Panic attacks are generally perceived as scarier than simple anxiety because they can cause us to feel like we're in immediate physical danger. The problem with this way of looking at things is that if we label panic as a more severe version of anxiety, then should we start to experience more panic attacks than anxiety attacks, we might then conclude we're in some way getting worse, thus creating further anxiety. So a common way I hear people defining between panic and anxiety is to say anxiety attacks are more psychological and panic attacks are more physical. Whilst with anxiety attacks we're aware of what we feel anxious about and have a cognitive focal point for our concerns with perhaps less direct physical symptoms, a panic attack is that instant visceral response that we don't necessarily perceive there to be a reason for. It just strikes us physically out of nowhere. Perhaps the most common way of distinguishing between an anxiety attack and a panic attack is to describe anxiety attacks to be more like a long-term build-up over time, eventually reaching a point of overwhelm, whereas a panic attack is instant with no prior warning. Also, many talk about anxiety attacks lasting longer than panic attacks. A panic attack is pretty much over in maybe a few minutes or even moments. Once we physically start to return to normal, we quickly calm that panic. But anxiety attacks can last a lot longer due to the fact that the things we're anxious about are generally more long-term concerns. So if we're talking purely on a science-based footing, then anxiety and panic are actually very different biologically. Panic involves the production of adrenaline, which is intended to facilitate immediate life-saving action. Anxiety involves the production of cortisol, the stress hormone. Now, this doesn't necessarily stop one response leading to the other, but what your body is actually doing based on your mind's understanding of the situation is completely different. Perhaps the most important distinction for me between anxiety attacks and panic attacks is the reason we're experiencing each particular effect. Anxiety tends to be focused on something about life that we're finding a challenge and starting to doubt our ability to cope with. It involves an assessment of how big the challenge we're facing is, how many things we have on our plate right now, and how highly we rate our ability to come out the other side of it. When it comes to panic, our concerns are focused on the panic itself. There's no real assessment of our ability to cope because our body's already displaying an inability to cope, and the response itself is now our main concern. The problem here is that whilst most mental health professionals will agree on what qualifies as a panic attack, the term anxiety attack isn't officially recognised or clearly defined. That's why different people distinguish between them in so many different ways. So if professionals seem to disagree on what we're talking about, then is there any real value in distinguishing between the two? Well, there can be. So I'm not a diagnostic practitioner, which means I'm not going to listen to you describe how you're feeling and then tell you a name for what I feel is officially wrong with you. When I work with clients, they'll tell me something about the way they think, feel, or behave that they're not happy about. They'll then tell me how they'd rather be responding, and we'll work together to get them that result. In that sense, we don't need to deal in objective definitions or labels, because it's only important that we both know what part of their process we're referring to as we work. The only reason it can be of value to decide whether or not we're dealing with an anxiety attack or a panic attack is if it affects how we're going to approach doing something about it. This is why some therapists will see the value of distinguishing between the two, because the tools they might use to help the client will differ. Some therapeutic approaches involve teaching techniques for stress relief or ongoing management of those feelings of anxiety. When it comes to panic attacks, because it's the fear of any future panic that can cause the panic, teaching management tools just perpetuates the idea that panic is something to fear, something that we need robust emotional and psychological strategies to overcome. So those strategies we get taught to manage and mitigate anxiety might just be increasing our concern and thus the likelihood of panic. Okay, here's the main point I want to make in this video. The real problem with labeling our response as either an anxiety attack or a panic attack is the use of the word attack. As soon as we label one of our emotional responses as an attack, we instantly frame it as something that happens to us rather than something we are doing. We effectively place ourselves in the role of victim. Whilst anxiety and panic can feel very much out of our control and like something that we've been unfortunate enough to have visit us today, the truth is that both these responses are things that our mind does. When we feel any emotional response, it's part of our mind taking an active role in creating that response, and it does it for a reason. Understanding that reason isn't always easy, especially when it feels like it's come out of nowhere. But if we accept that there is one, then we can start to get active in understanding and changing our responses. The bottom line here is that the labels we give our emotional responses are seldom helpful. Yes, it might go some way towards explaining to someone other than ourselves what we're currently feeling, but using a term that many have differing definitions of is just as likely to create confusion as it is clarity. Any labels inevitably come with preconceptions, which are, in the case of anxiety, almost always misconceptions. These are, after all, just names we give things. What's more important is what's going on with you, why do we feel that's happening, and how do we get something different happening instead? For more advice on how we do this, then check out some of my other videos. I'll link a couple at the end that might well be of value if this one's been of interest to you. If you have any questions, then put them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer all of them. And why not join me on my weekly live stream on this channel where I answer your questions about anxiety and any other aspects of mental health and emotional well-being. It happens every Friday at 6 p.m. GMT. Before you head off, please hit that thumbs up button if you like what I do, and why not subscribe to the channel for weekly mind management tips and anxiety advice. But that's it for now. I'm Tim Box, Mind Coach. Always remember to be kind to your mind, and I'll see you next time.